And we're live. Welcome, everyone, to our Diabetes Awareness Week live show. I'm your host, Samantha Salmon, National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. And today we're diving into one of the most powerful tools for preventing and managing diabetes, which is nutrition. I'm honored to have with me Miss Timaree Hagenburger, aka the Nutrition Professor. She's a registered dietitian, educator, and cookbook author who is passionate about plant-based nutrition and empowering people to create delicious, health-supporting meals. Timaree, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yay! I am so excited to be with you. I had a chance to do an event with you and online, and I loved every minute. And so once we were done, we said, we're going to do this again. And
Yes.
then I was just honored for you to bring up the topic of diabetes because it is one of the conditions where it's one of the best, I know this sounds crazy, conditions to have as someone because you have a lot of control, not only on the outcome, but on the monitoring and on the way that you can learn about how your body responds
Mhm.
to different kinds of, techniques or strategies that with. Whereas something like cancer is harder because we can't see what's happening. We have to go for scans and biopsies, and it's so much out of our control.
Mhm.
But we have access by way of a lot of different options to test even our blood sugar continuously, with all the continuous glucose monitors. So even old school, when you tested your blood sugar 1 hour or 2 hours after a meal, that gave us feedback. So it's one of the best diseases to have because it's something we can also, for many people, put into remission. So to really kind of reverse the direction that they were headed in. So for that reason and for many more, I am honored to be a guest with you live tonight.
Yes, and this week, that is the main story. It's all about hope. We're diving into the weeds about what it means to, have type 2 diabetes. Why do you have type 2 diabetes? What is pre-diabetes about? So I would love for you to kind of school us in on this. But first, I want to kind of hear your story. What initially drew you to plant-based nutrition?
Oh my goodness. Well, I have been a dietitian for this year. I'm just coming up to the month where it will be 26 years
Wow.
of being a dietitian. And I am very proud to do that because it does impact people's quality of life, not only longevity, but their quality. And I've always been interested in health and cooking. And I actually wanted to go to culinary school. And then I realized, working in a restaurant, I think it would work the love out of, the passion out of the passion I had for cooking and food because a lot of it's very tough and not that fun. And I thought I want to be able to connect with people and teach people. So, but being able to stay within the food realm and medicine. So, my idea about going to med school, I kind of put them together and thought I could be a dietitian. So, my mom actually was a dietitian as well, and I didn't think of
Ah.
it because it was too close to home. It was kind of like I wanted to do everything else. And then I realized, duh, that makes the most sense. So I was a dietitian for about 11 years before I found plant based. And I definitely made a positive impact in so many people's lives. But I kind of saw that story over and over again of one step forward, two steps back. And it was hard to put my hand on that missing link. And then I ended up going to a class at a church that was a cooking class put on by someone who was vegan. And I'll never forget. She said, she said, I love animals, but I hate vegetables. And I kind of thought, what are you talking about? And she said, so I had to learn how to cook this stuff in a way I'd eat it because I don't like vegetables, but I love animals so much that I couldn't, see them suffering
Yeah.
or contribute to it. So I thought, what is this about? I mean, I'd learned about vegetarianism when I was in school and my master's program and my undergrad. But interestingly, it was always talked about in textbooks and even by faculty as at risk for nutrient deficiencies, right? It's like, oh, and the vegetarians and oh, and the vegans, like they're really on the fringe of, we have to make sure that they really plan, their diets. Come to find out, we are really digging our grave with our knife and fork with this animal product situation. And now, obviously, processed food has become just everywhere, but also the combination of processed animal products, you really get into the weeds with that. But when I started learning more, I thought, this is it. This is what I've been missing. And so I dove in both feet because I take what recommendations I give, I first have to use them for myself and make sure that I can do it. And so I implemented it because once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't unknow, and I thought, I can't keep eating this way. I can't feed this to my family. So we went whole food plant-based, and that was 2010. And I have not looked back. I started a plant-based program at my college that I was working, plant-based nutrition and sustainable ag certificate program. I went all in completely and changed the way I lectured and help my parents transition, help my sister transition, and then thousands of people, as far as students wise. And so the more I learn, the more research that comes out, it just exemplifies that we're headed in the right direction. Even if we're talking about global health, environmental health, like all arrows point towards this way of approaching food and nourishing our bodies. So once I found this, I was already smitten with dietetics, but this just took it to the next level. And I thought, okay, this is it. Yeah. I never in my wildest dreams thought I didn't even know a vegetarian growing up. I grew up in Northern California, but I grew up Italian. We didn't have vegetarians, it was like, but now I was able to create everything that my mom and dad taught us how to make and, their parents, but in a way that, as I say, loved you back. So that's how I found it. And once you find it, you can never go back. I don't think so.
Yeah. And this is really cool because when you talk about coming from an Italian family, a lot of people say, it's so hard to make dietary changes because of the cultural traditions. But what we do know about type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, is that the mechanism behind it is insulin resistance, and the driver for that are a lot of some of the ingredients in some of these dishes. So
right.
I would love for you to kind of explain, how can whole plant-based foods support the goal that really folks are looking for reversal of these issues?
So a good way to think about this is that plants have all of these different natural compounds that basically create an internal environment in your body that supports optimal glucose control, glucose metabolism, body functioning, greater metabolism in general. And there's a few kind of areas that you can think about when you think about specifically type 2. So we are not talking about type 1. So type 1 diabetes is pretty much, we know, as an autoimmune condition, which is also linked with some of these issues, but we're going to keep that separate, where your pancreas stops producing the hormone insulin. So in a true type 1, and now we've learned about a lot of variations. There's 1.5, there's late onset type 1, there's varied degree, which we could talk about that for hours on its own. But type 1, classic, no more insulin, typically under 18. But now we do have some late onset. But then you have to have exogenous insulin. So you have to have insulin from the outside that comes either by injections or by a pump. And that is, we can do pancreatic transplants. Sometimes we'll see people, very rarely, but have pancreatic transplants. But typically, this is something for life. And diet can make a huge difference on how controlled and how well the body does with staving off complications with type 1 diabetes. But it's not something that we typically talk about with reversal or remission if it's truly a type 1, because those beta cells in the pancreas, if they're non-functional, they're non-functional. Now, in the future, who knows what will happen, but there are some great resources for people with type 1 diabetes that make the control excellent. One is Mastering Diabetes. Two gentlemen who have type 1 diabetes that really dove into that. So that's a separate issue. But for type 2, we used to call that, adult onset. Now they've changed it several years ago to type 2. And that's because we don't just have older people with this condition. Now we're seeing kids and kids under 10 with this type of diabetes that is marked by insulin resistance. So we typically have those cells in the pancreas that produce insulin. It's just that the cell receptors, so each cell has receptors because insulin is needed in order to get glucose to cross the cell membrane and get inside to do the work of the cell. So it's not, there are a few compounds, water being one, molecules that can go right through the cell wall. Cell membrane. Cell wall is in plants, cell membrane in human, that'll go right through the cell membrane. But glucose isn't one of them. There has to be a whole cascade of reactions that will bring some, almost like little gates open to the edge of the cell membrane. They open and like a little channel, and it brings the glucose in. Insulin is involved in that process. But when the insulin can't make good contact with the receptors for any step along that process, the glucose sits outside of the cell and it doesn't get in. The cells starve and the blood sugar is high because the glucose is sitting outside of the cells in the blood. And then it damages all kinds of cells. And it actually, people will know this term with their blood tests of glycosylated hemoglobin. So that is basically the amount of your hemoglobin, we can talk about that in general as like red blood cell, that is caramelized. That's basically how the glucose is attached to it. And the percentage of that you'd see for that number, let's say it's 12, that correlates to an average blood sugar over the last 3 months, because red blood cells last for about 3 months before they're broken down and kind of recycled or discarded. So having high blood sugar damages red blood cells and it damages a lot of tissue. And so when we think about type 2 diabetes, we think about organs that really get the brunt of the damage that are very vascularized. Okay, so think of blood vessels and red blood cells, and you think of eyes, right? Lots and lots of blood vessels. You think of kidneys. Kidneys are nothing more than a system of blood vessels that are filters, right? You think of nerve damage that has to do also with blood flow, and the oxygenation of the nerve cells, right? We think of, and heart because of the blood vessels. So anywhere in your body that you have blood vessels, which is everywhere, you're going to be at risk for damage from high blood sugar. Mm-hmm. So anything that interrupts that situation will cause greater risk of diabetes, type 2. And that same damage that I just mentioned, that happens with type 1 as well when the blood sugars are high. So high blood sugars, think of high as hyperglycemia, that damages cells. And it doesn't matter if you can feel it or not. It's hurting your body. So there's a few situations that really make for a hotbed of diabetes, especially for type 2. And one is inflammation. So if there are habits or foods that you consume that increases inflammation, then that's going to put you at risk for insulin resistance. So when we think about that, excess body fat is a huge piece. Especially, you've probably heard about the visceral fat, right? In kind of like in the abdominal area around the organs. So not like in your hips and your thighs, but around the organs. Very dangerous. And when you see kind of that big tummy, often with very small legs, but big tummy, they kind of carry all their weight in the front. Very, very problematic, because that fat, especially, it's bothersome to the liver, but it reacts differently. And we often would think of fat just as a storage. It's like a freezer that you just put extra calories into. But we actually know now it is an alive organ that excretes chemicals and hormones. So it is active. And what happens is when you have a lot of visceral fat, then it can trigger something called cytokines that release can basically trigger inflammation. And when things are inflamed, when you have some inflammation, then the body will respond with insulin resistance. Now, this is well studied. These like meta-analysis. And what they find is plant-based diets show inflammatory markers go down. One inflammatory marker that people listening would probably be familiar with is CRP, C-reactive protein. Not very difficult to get tested by your doctor. You can ask for HS, the high sensitive. So HS, little h, little s, capital C, capital R, capital P. And there was even a study, actually, it was an 8-week study with looking at the American Heart Association diet versus the vegan diet, and vegan meaning no animal products. They saw after 8 weeks a 32% drop in HSCRP. So that's, on the inflammation side, we know that there are a lot of foods that are inflammatory. There's a lot of compounds. You may have heard of new 5GC. That is a compound in meat and dairy that is non-human, but the body responds thinking it's a foreign body and starts to rev up the immune system. And then that can interfere with insulin utilization as well. So 1 is inflammation. 2, and I'll try to make this quick because there's a lot here, but 2 is oxidative stress. So we hear a lot about damage that's done to our DNA and our cells. And whenever you think of that, you think about cancer, but you also need to think about damaging the beta cells in the pancreas that make insulin. So we find that oxidative stress is higher in non-plant-based, non-vegetarians, because we think part of it is the lack of antioxidant-rich foods. So your fruits, your vegetables, your legumes, your herbs and spices, hugely, grains, those all have antioxidant phytonutrients in them. And so those are fantastic. And we see much less of the pro-oxidant, which would be, pro-oxidative stress, one of those being iron, and then a lot of other compounds, the saturated fat, lots of issues. Lipotoxicity, this is really important. This is when, so I had mentioned that our bodies can store fat, and we kind of used to think of it like as a refrigerator or freezer, like just put that, in storage. And as frustrating as it is, because most people don't want a lot of extra body fat in, here and there, people just, they didn't think it was so damaging. But we know that if our body sometimes takes in calories so fast, and this is where the processed food comes in too, that we don't even have time to package it up and put it in our subcutaneous fat areas, the hips and the thighs and those places. So it ends up getting shoved into the liver and the pancreas and the muscles and the heart. And so those are places where we're not supposed to have extra fat. And so when we do, it causes damage. So it can cause damage to the pancreas directly, to the liver, to the heart directly. And we can even see it into the brain and the muscles, though, for sure. Muscles are not supposed to be laden with fat. And it makes it hard for the insulin to do its job because there's so much fat in the muscles. So, and then we see that when we look at research, plant-based and specifically vegan has the lowest rates of overweight and obesity of all dietary patterns. And even they've looked at omnivores versus plant-based, and they see that lower lipid levels in the muscles and lowest intake of saturated fat. And that all can lead to lipotoxicity. And then last is dysbiosis. So that is when the microbiota of the body, especially in the gut, is not regulated, is imbalanced. So we see that there's a link to obesity, there's a link to inflammation. Again, it's this vicious circle, and insulin resistance. So we see that when the microbiota, most people don't realize it's our basically number one level of the immune system. That layer of bacteria protect us from the outside world. When you eat something, you are one cell away from your bloodstream. One tiny cell. And we need an army there to be able to say, wait a second, you can't just come in here to the bloodstream just because you were on the outside and this person swallowed you. We have to be really careful about what we let cross over. But when we have this imbalance, then we have what people will often term leaky gut. And those cells won't come together with tight junctions. There will be space. And in that space, molecules can come in, and endotoxins can come in, and that it's not a good situation. So what do we see? Unhealthy diets that are high in refined carbohydrate, high in meat, high in fat, low in fiber, and the low carb trend, which starves the gut microbiota, because that's what they live on. They live on fiber, leads to dysbiosis. And fiber is important. Fermented foods are important. And it's a hot mess with all four of these, but you can basically each one of them by really adopting the plant-based whole food, right? Not just junk food version. You can see the other side of this without question. Okay, that was a lot.
That was great and really comprehensive. I love that. And so basically, to summarize all of that, if you're looking for reversal, you need to focus on fiber, you need to focus on plants. In the plant world, though, we do have a low fat way of eating and a high fat way of eating. And I just found out that even in the fruitarian world, in the raw food world, there are folks doing high fat fruitarian, which I didn't even know was possible. So I would love for you to kind of let us know, like, if for folks who are on that journey of looking to reverse diabetes or improve insulin sensitivity, right? Because that is the goal.
Right.
Should we be looking at low fat? Should we be looking at high fat? What does the research say?
So there has been some research. It hasn't been years and years and years and years and years, although you can look back and extract pieces from the research. But let's go back to the idea of what we're trying to do. So if we're trying to reduce inflammation, right? So we have inflammation, we have oxidative stress, we have lipotoxicity, and we have dysbiosis. So and the other thing that's really important that we have to put in the back of our mind too is that most people who have diabetes don't die from diabetes. They die from heart disease. Heart disease is the number one killer. So we always have to keep that in mind because you can die with something, not necessarily from something. Now, granted, diabetes is accelerating heart disease because of the way that it damages the heart and the vessels and the kidneys and you're one body, one of everything. So this idea that you can't just hurt one part of the system and then expect the rest of it to be fine. But we want to keep that in mind. So we want a way of eating that also protects our heart. And so with that in mind, we see because of the fact that fat is 9 calories per gram, and this is not a discussion about counting calories. I do not recommend counting calories. We need to look at quality of what we're eating. All calories are not equal, and that just needs to be said at the beginning. But this idea that because they're 9 calories per gram, quantity wise, it is so easy to overeat when you include high fat foods because you're definitely not going to get satiated early. Later, the food may sit in your stomach and kind of give you that feeling that may make you not want to go eat more. But while you're eating it, it's not heavy. So it doesn't take up weight. It doesn't take up space. So you're not going to have stretch receptors that are activated throughout your gut. So it is so easy to overeat. So easy. You add 2 tablespoons of oil to something, don't even realize it's in there, 240 calories. So that is going to be an issue with excess body fat. So for those people who have type 2 and have visceral fat, and you don't have to be overweight. You can just have that fat in the quote unquote wrong place in the abdominal area. So, and then we were talking about lipotoxicity. So if you're bringing in calories fast, then that's going to be hard for your body to process. And so we also see that different foods can impact the microbiota differently. And so high fiber foods are typically not laden with fat. We don't typically see that combination. So it really, I have found most people are more successful long term with the remission, like getting major action when they go towards the low fat. Because it helps practically you make better choices, because if you don't, for often people will look to, oh my gosh, there's so many plant-based options now that are packaged foods. This is so cool. We can eat this, we can eat that. But a lot of those foods are trying to market also to people who are not plant-based. And so they often have a lot of fat. They often have a lot of salt. But if you're trying to go truly with a low-fat plant, whole plant food, then you're going to end up looking at those foods and saying, I'm not going to buy this. I'm just going to make something. I'm going to make something absolutely delicious that would be excellent, and I'm going to pass that up. But if you're just thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to add, I can add a ton of fat. This is not that much fat. That's great. Okay, I'll do that option. It gets tough. And for a lot of people, it's just so difficult to regulate, if they do 1 handful of nuts, 2 handful of nuts, 3 handful of nuts, or they make some desserts and they're full of calories because they're super high in the highest fat foods. And sometimes we don't see that response with blood sugars, because what we often will see is as soon as you can pull the fat out, especially the saturated fat, out of the diet, we start to see the blood sugars drop.
Mm-hmm.
And so that relationship, just, we don't see it when people are still eating a lot of fat. So
So
there's
we
been
need to
many
focus
studies. Yeah.
basically on low fat then if we want to
Mm-hmm.
really see results. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. So you wrote The Foodie Bar Way, which helps people create customizable, family friendly meals. I would love for you to share how this approach can help someone transition to a healthier way of eating, like they're on this road to reversal.
Absolutely. So, first off, you have to love what you eat. Now, for some people, this is a process. It's a process of learning how to love the food that loves you back. And with any kind of learning, it's really fun to have options, because I have always wanted, and I've always done this, is try to meet people where they are. This is the goal we want in this situation, right? We want reversal, remission of diabetes. And we're not there yet because we're in the thick of it. So we have to make this journey, this path. And with that, it's, for some people, they like to just flip the switch. They throw everything away or they donate all of it and they say, okay, I'm filling my fridge with all kinds of new things. But for most people, that's either temporary or that is too much of a shock. And they just feel like this is out of my control and I don't know if I can do this. But when you start with foods and meals that you recognize and say, you mean I could eat pasta? Because you hear about all these, you can never eat this, you can never eat that. I can eat pizza. I can have fried rice. Well, my unfried rice, I can eat rice. And so then well, maybe I could make some of these little shifts. And, people will say one ingredient could ruin a dish for them, right? If you don't like olives and someone made some kind of a dish, casserole or whatever, with olives in there, you may not, especially if they're cut small enough, that just may, I'm not doing it. Or cilantro. There's a whole camp of people. They're like, I hate cilantro. And then others of us are like, bring it on. So you don't want someone else to make your food. You want to actually be able to have it your way. And if you don't know what cilantro tastes like, then you want to be able to put a little bit in there, a little on the corner, and then taste it and think, oh, And that's what this is about. And this is also, the Foodie Bar Way is about living in a house where not everybody eats the same. Rarely do we have, or friend groups where everybody eats exactly the same. And it's that kind of idea is not sustainable. We need to be able to say, if you don't like olives, that's fine. Just don't put yours on, olives on yours. I'll do mine. You do yours. We're still eating a pizza or whatever the situation is, but we're doing it the way you like it. And it helps with kids too, because we need to expose them. I've always been committed to helping kids. And so families expose themselves to all these different foods. I even had someone at work today. So I work at the WIC program, and I had someone that said, young, she was 19, pregnant. And I said, when you need to be able to expand the different foods that you have. I said, if you have tried something and you didn't like it, then I said, you have to use what I always tell my students. That's interesting. I don't believe I've had that prepared in a way I've enjoyed it yet. And she said, it's true. Because I'll go to a restaurant to get something and I'll think, no way, that was cauliflower? Oh, when my mom used to make it, it was stinky and mushy, but it's how you prepare it. So this book is an invitation to explore, and everything in there supports health. So you don't have to feel like, oh, I don't know what to do. You just let your just your exploration and your curiosity take over. So, and I just have to say, I wrote this book in 2015. Published it, self-published in 2016. The first one came in January, end of 2015. And I still cook out of it every single week. I did not put in recipes that were just, special events, 12 hours to make. No, this is what I still use. And I go back to it and I go back to it. And I do cooking demos from it in my Foodie Bar Way of Life community. And this has 13 foodie bars to set you up. Like I said, pizza, pasta, all those things. I have done another, I think it's been at least 20 more foodie bars in the Foodie Bar Way of Life. Everything from a waffle foodie bar. You think, no oil waffle is possible? Yes. To pho, to Ethiopian food. We have sushi. We have all kinds of things. Anything that you would imagine dreaming up. That's what we do. We say, hey, how could we do that whole food plant-based that loves you back? And I'm on it. And so we put our heads together and we figure it out, and then we enjoy. So it's a joy. This is the last thing just to say is a lot of people will take this diagnosis of diabetes or prediabetes. If you've heard prediabetes, take it seriously. Just pretend like they said diabetes, but take this as an omen, right? Like, oh, this is a burden that I now have to carry. And I would flip that around and say, this is an opportunity to finally get to a place where I'm actually taking care of myself. Mm-hmm. Not only in, a lot of people think of self-care as pedicures and, those types of things. I want that to start with a fork. Mm-hmm. I want people to be taking care of themselves, nourishing themselves as the foundation of self-care. And you and I talked about this on our last session, is we were saying that we'd like to see conventional medicine as the alternative, that the foundation is what you talk about, what I talk about. That's where we start with health. And then if there are issues, then we start going into the alternative of conventional medicine, where we have to talk about medicines and procedures and all of that, rather than that being where they start. Oh, well, if this doesn't work, I guess you could try diet. It's like, yeah. No. So, okay.
Yes, I love all of that. And I love the concept of the book and how that makes it so accessible for families, because a lot of people, that is the difficulty. I cook for my husband, he wants to eat a certain way. I cook for my kids, they want to eat a certain way. So now you get to just have a whole nice buffet that doesn't, take too much time. It's accessible and everyone can eat, even if they have, like, even in my home, we're all vegan eaters, but we eat differently. We have different metabolisms, we have different, food sensitivities, so even within a completely vegan household, we need variety. We need, we're not all eating the exact same.
And even in a single person, many of the people in the Foodie Bar Way of Life, my community, they live alone. They don't have this issue. And so they often, when they first started learning about, they said, well, we don't have big families that we cook for. We're on our own. But that idea that this system works because you have parts and pieces that you get to put together and recreate, because nobody likes eating the same thing every day. And it's not even good nutrition-wise to only eat the same things. We want variety. So that's part of how I have not missed a beat. I have not longed for anything all these years. It's because the variety is always there, and I'm not ever tired of it. And I always have something I can put together quickly. And so we use the freezer. It's fabulous. We have little prep togethers. We do all kinds of things to make it sustainable. That's my goal, because there's plenty of programs that are 12 days, 21 days, 7 days. I want this for life, because I was very intentional when I said diabetes remission, and even reversal, but remission I use specifically because if you go back to the way that you were eating when those situations came to fruition, you will go right back there and struggle with glucose control. It is not like, oh yeah, that was just a past situation. Now I can eat however I want, quote unquote, and then not have these issues. Oh no, it's coming back. And especially with cancer, I've often seen people who have gone the plant-based whole food route and then for some reason go back and that cancer comes back fast.
Yeah, I
And
have
it's like
a health coach friend like this. And for
terrible.
the some reason is a big one too, because I think, like with my friend, there was lack of family support, there was family stress, and when you add all of that, now the emotional eating, the giving up, the giving in, and then
Yeah.
so it gets really
And
difficult. But I love this conversation, Timaree. I think you've
I
provided so
know.
much hope for folks,
Yay!
that they can do this. Reversal is possible. It's something that you can reach for if you have type 2 or pre-diabetes. If you have type 1, you can improve your insulin sensitivity,
Significantly.
but reversal is not feasible as far as we know right now, based
But
on the science that we have available at this time.
right. But that idea that most people with diabetes don't die from diabetes, they die from heart disease.
Yeah.
So, this type of way of eating supports heart health, which is good for every single person on the planet. I mean,
Yeah.
we all need to be
And your other
mindful of
organs, your
that.
kidneys, your liver,
Absolutely.
all of
So,
that.
yes, we're all attached, and it's all blood vessels
Yeah.
and it's all immune system. And if we can keep the cells healthy, then we truly can keep our whole self healthy. And we don't have time to talk about all the other pieces, the stress and all the other pieces, but this this causes metabolic stress when we eat foods that are not in line with our metabolism, and what
Mm-hmm.
we're supposed to be doing in nature to get all those phytonutrients.
Yeah.
We can't
Yeah.
make them. They are essential, even though,
Essential nutrients, essential foods. Thank you so
yeah.
much, Timaree. This has been such an inspiring and practical conversation on how folks can actually make this happen. And I know so many people will benefit from your knowledge and your passion. I'm like, that's what really stands out to me is after 26 years of being in this dietitian, work,
Yes,
that
world.
you still speak with someone who's just brand new, like with that new vigor and energy. And I love that about you so much. For those of you watching, if you're looking for easy, delicious ways to incorporate more plant-based meals into your life, Timaree's cookbook and online community are fantastic resources. Of course, we have links in the description wherever you're watching this. I see folks with us live on YouTube. Hey, Danny. Hey, Becky. On Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us live. And we will be checking the comments. So if you have any questions, it's Diabetes Awareness Week. This full week of programming is all for you. So make sure you put questions in the comment box. We will be responding to them and talking about them live and responding in the chat. Timaree, where can folks find more about your work and connect with you deeper?
So the best way to find me is thenutritionprofessor.com. I make it easy. From there, you can get to my website for my book and you can schedule time to talk to me. I do one-on-one work and the Foodie Bar Way of Life community. So thenutritionprofessor.com. You can find me there. And I get so excited about connections with everybody, and to the point that my family's like, oh my gosh, don't talk to someone else in the grocery store, mom, focus. But it's just, it comes out of me because our life, we have so much to be thankful for,
Yeah.
and it can be taken away quickly. And so it's important that we feel well enough to enjoy the people around us and the experiences that we have in this amazing life. So it is an honor. Thank
Thank
you.
you. And thank you all for joining us. Take care. Have a blessed week. And we will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about how type 2 diabetes affects your cognitive health. So be sure to tune in. Take care.